Come in, come in, and don't leave your broken heart at the door. Bring it with you to the altar of life. Don't leave your anger behind. It has high standards and the world needs vision. Bring them with you, and your joy and your passion. Bring your loving and your courage and your conviction. Bring your need for healing and your powers to heal. There is work to be done, and all that we need to do it is right here in these rooms. Good morning, and welcome to First Unitarian Church, just as you are. I'm Angela Herrera, the Senior Minister. I'm joined this morning by our Associate Minister, Bob LaValle, and by our Music Director, Susan Peck. And I'm also joined by a crew of wonderful volunteers and lay leaders. Our DJ this morning is Dan Small, and I'm happy to introduce Casey Spivey to you. Casey was a regular lay worship leader in our services in the sanctuary and is here this morning helping with Zoom worship for the very first time. Welcome back, Casey. Welcome back to lay leadership. It takes many hearts and hands and minds working together to make church. We're so glad to be together with you this morning for this virtual service. And now Casey will share a couple of announcements.
Good morning, friends. I'm delighted I do not have to wear a face covering for this event. 2 announcements. If you're interested in becoming a member, you can contact Lara Magnuson directly at the link in the chat bar, or go to the online form in the chat bar, becoming a member, ready to join form. Online signing services happen on the first Sunday of every month. And secondly, starting this week, we're going to slightly loosen our security protocols and allow folks to message each other one-to-one during the prelude and postlude. Prior to this, congregants could only send private messages to the worship leaders. Our hope is that this will foster connection and community. If anyone receives a message that is unwelcome or inappropriate, however, please let the worship leaders know. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. I light our chalice this morning in honor of the thousands of Unitarian Universalists who gathered this week at our virtual General Assembly, who are reaching out across the live streams to be rooted, inspired, and ready to further the work of justice and peace. In the words of Reverend Lynn Unger from her poem Pandemic, do not reach out your hands, reach out your heart, reach out your words, reach out all the tendrils of compassion that move invisibly where we cannot touch. Will you please join me in singing our opening song, Building Bridges? This song was written by members of the Greenham Common Peace Camp, a group of women who protested nuclear missiles in Berkshire, England from 1983 through the year 2000. It's a song about reaching out to one another, sharing our voices and our visions in harmony. The words are in the chat box, and it's a short song, so we'll sing it through a number of times. I'll start slow. Building bridges between our divisions, I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony. Building bridges between our divisions, I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony. One more time, sing out. Building bridges between our divisions, I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony. Friends, we could make such sweet harmony. Friends, we could make such sweet harmony.
Hi, my name is Ron. I invite you to join me in the Unitarian Universalist Children's Affirmation. Ready? Here we go. We are Unitarian Universalists. We are people of faith, with open minds, loving hearts, and helping hands. Thank you.
Oh, hey, Angela. Oh, this is Carl. Carl, why are you calling on Angela's phone? Well, yeah, I know you don't have one of your own. Hey, does Angela know that you're using her phone? Not exactly? Oh, she wasn't using it, so it was fine, right? Okay, Carl. So anyways, what's up? Oh, you really liked the drive-by parade for Jane. Yeah, I love that. That was so fun. And you want to go for another drive? Sure, let's do that. How's Sunday? All right, I'll pick you up. Okay? And hey, give Angela her phone back, all right? Okay, bye. Hey kids, so the puppets said they want to go take a ride, and would you like to come too? Awesome. You want to help me call Carl and Olivia? Let's call them. Carl! Oh hey. Olivia. Oh hi, hey, what's going on, y'all? Great. So y'all ready to take a ride? Fantastic. Let's do it. Oh wait. You can't get the seat belts to work. Yeah, I get that. Well, you are kind of small, you know. But you know what? I don't think puppets need seat belts. But I do appreciate that you're wearing your mask. So thanks for that. So, all right. Should we get going? Cool. So where do you want to go? Oh, Olivia, you want to go to Brazil, to the rainforest, to study owls. Huh. Well, I'm sorry, Olivia, but that's like weeks and weeks of driving to get down to Brazil. So what about something closer? You want to go to someplace in Albuquerque? All right. Oh, Carl, you want to go to the zoo? Cool. Yeah. Well, we can drive by there, I think. Why do you want to go? What do you want to see? Oh, you don't want to see anything. You want to eat somebody. Carl, that's not how zoos work. Zoos are for looking at animals, not eating them. I'm sorry. So we'll have to pick something else. You know what? I have an idea. Why don't we go to the church? We haven't been to the church in so long. You know, it might be good to check it out. Do you like that idea? Cool. Great. Well, let's go. We're off. What's that, Olivia? You want to listen to the radio? Great. What station? Oh, you want to listen to classical music? Sure, we can do that. I love that. Carl, why are you howling? You don't like classical music? Okay, fine. We can change it. What do you want? What do you want to hear? Oh, you want to hear some Mexican music? Fantastic. All right. All right, folks, look, we're here at church. Yeah, isn't that great? No, Olivia, even though it's Sunday morning, there's nobody here. Yeah, they're all still attending on Zoom. Yeah, I miss the sanctuary too, but we're doing that to keep everybody healthy until we can all get back together again. Yeah, Olivia, it sure is a beautiful campus though, isn't it? Yeah. No, Carl, we can't see if there are any animals here for you to eat. Sorry. So, want to head back? Should we go back? Oh, Carl, you say you're hungry? All right. Hey, what do you think about stopping at McDonald's? Sure, why not? All right, let's go. Let's go to McDonald's. All right, we're ready to order. Hey, so Olivia, what are you having? Oh, I'm sorry, Olivia. They just have hamburgers, not mouse burgers. Darn it. Well, hey, how about a fish fillet? Oh, that's great. Okay, cool. Let's go with that. One fish fillet, please. Okay, and Carlos, what are you having? Oh, okay. You want a Big Mac? Big Mac, and a quarter pounder with cheese. Quarter pounder with cheese, and 20-piece chicken McNugget, and an egg McMuffin. And I think that's it, Carl. I think that's enough to get you home. All right. All right, great. Wow, geez, some coyotes. Holy cow. All right, that's our order. All right, well, we're home. Did y'all have fun? Yeah, Olivia, it's nice to get out of the house sometimes, isn't it? Are there other ways that y'all like to get out of the house? Yeah, it's good to fly and hunt, right, Olivia? And going back to McDonald's is good too, right? Yeah. Taking walks is nice. Working in the garden is nice. You know? What's that, Carl? Oh yeah, howling at the moon is a really great way to blow off steam. I agree. But you know what? Maybe you want to do that when you're out camping instead of Angela's backyard, right? Right. Well, that's good. Well, anyways, it was so great to see y'all. It's nice to get a little outing sometimes, right? Get a little change of scenery. Great. Well, it was great to see you. So let's say goodbye. 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 Goodbye.
Join me now in the spirit of meditation. Teachers of meditation tell us that the mind is like the sky. Regardless of the weather down below, the sun above is always shining, and that part of the sky is always clear. Our thoughts are like the weather, blowing through clouds and rainstorms. In the act of meditating, we watch the clouds that obscure our view of that clear sky, and we learn to see past those clouds to the serenity above. As we take 2 minutes for silent meditation now, let's note our thoughts that keep us from seeing the clear sky that is at the heart of our minds. Let's observe our thoughts without judgment and let them pass, like leaves floating down a stream. Let our thoughts go without attachment, without grasping onto them. Simply observe the thoughts, release them, and let the blue sky of our real minds come through. Let us enter the silence.
In sharing joys and concerns, our happiness is multiplied and our burdens are lessened. When the video begins, share your joys and concerns in the chat bar that we may hold them together. If you're not able to write them in the chat bar, we'd still love to know what's on your heart. Send an email to caring@firstuabq.org. Again, caring@firstuabq.org. And let us know how you're doing. Let's now share our joys and concerns.
For whom shall we live? And how will we be remembered? Inheritors of the moment, our legacy never ends. This life's for the living, for the loving and the giving. It's a gift for the children of the generations ahead. My heart is full and my hands are open, and the work of love is the life I've chosen. My arms are wide in a world that's broken, with a holy tribe, this human race in motion. For whom shall we live? And how will we be remembered? Inheritors of the moment, our legacy never ends. This life's for the living, for the loving and the giving. It's a gift for the children of the generations ahead. My heart is full and my hands are open, and the work of love is the life I've chosen. My arms are wide in a world that's broken, with a holy tribe, this human race in motion.
We see each other's prayers in the chat bar. We see gratitude for neighbors and for new jobs and for good leadership and for birds and nature and the opportunity to be outside and lifting up all the possibility of healing that we're seeing around us. And we see cares being carried too. And we see Pamela Livingston having to say goodbye to a beloved cat. We lift you up, Pamela. And concern for the sick and the isolated, and concern for the future of this country. We lift up all these prayers and the prayers that are held in our hearts unspoken, but no less deeply felt. We lift up these prayers to the powers of healing and renewal and celebration that are known by many names. And we remember the Reverend Steve Finney, former minister of the Rio Rancho UU Church, who passed in May. May his family and friends find comfort in the memories of a life of service, and may light perpetual shine upon him. And we mourn with Barry Clark on the passing of his brother Bill Clark yesterday. May Barry and his family be lifted up by the care and support of this congregation, and may light perpetual shine upon Bill Clark. We pray for all those who are incarcerated now, facing the cruel possibility of infection from COVID without proper prevention or care. May they be healthy and safe. May they find freedom soon. We celebrate the summer solstice that passed last week. May we take comfort in the reminders that the cycle of nature continues on, regardless of human virtue and human folly. We pray for all those who participated in the Unitarian Universalist Association's General Assembly this past weekend. We give thanks for the members of First U who participated as delegates, helping to guide our denomination to greater grace and greater courage. And we celebrate the Commission on Institutional Change, who labored for years to create a report that both calls us into deeper understanding of the existence of oppression within Unitarian Universalism, and that offers us a deeper path, a path to deeper connection and the possibilities of true inclusion. In this time of upheaval and disruption, we find comfort and support in this beloved congregation. May we remember that we need never go it alone. May we see the beauty and the holy, the beautiful and the holy in our neighborhoods. May we see the beautiful and the holy in each other. May we see the beautiful and the holy in ourselves. And may we all be held in the heart of love. Peace be with you.
I am, you are me. That's what I said. I am, you are me. Don't you see? I am, you are me. That's what I said. I am, you are me. Don't you see? Seems like I'm over here and you're over there, but there's something between us that's greater than there. Don't you see? Like I'm over here and you're over there, but there's something between us that's greater than there. Don't you see? Like I'm over here and you're over there, that's what there's something between us that's me and you. Don't you see? I'm over here and you're over there, that's what there's something between us that's me and you. Don't you see? I'm over here and you're over there, there's something between us that's me and you. Don't you see? I'm over here and you're over there, there's something between us that's me and you. It seems like I am a part of you, you are a part of me, and so together we are one body. I am inside your head, you are inside my heart. We fit together, perfect from the start. I am, you are me. That's what I said. I am, you are me. Don't you see? Like I'm over here, I'm over here, you're over there, that's what I said. Something between us, don't you see? I'm over here, I'm over here, you're over there, but there's something between us, don't you see? I'm over here, and I'm over there, there's something between us, don't you see? I am a part of you, you are a part of me, and so together we are one body. I am inside your head, you are inside my heart. We fit together, perfect from the start. I am a part of you, you are a part of me, and so
the unstoppable chalice singers, everyone. Good morning, my fellow Americans and friends. It is my humble honor to stand before you to appear before you this morning and to announce that today, for the next 20 minutes and the next 20 minutes only, I am running for US president. Okay, I know what some of you are thinking, and you are right. First Unitarian is a tax-exempt religious organization, which means that we do not get involved in electoral politics. We share information about values and issues. We encourage you to vote, but we don't tell you who to vote for. But don't worry, because unlike real candidates who tell you what they think in order to further their candidacy, I'm using my candidacy to tell you what I think. I'm running for president this morning because it's so important to pause and to pan back and to look at this moment almost precisely in the middle of the year 2020, and for all of us to think about our location in history. It's important to do this so that we can imagine and visualize and co-create the path forward rather than staring at our feet. As a minister, I've thought a lot about the intersection of the infinite and the finite, which is to say, I've reflected often on our spiritual values and our historical context. That's my job, to lead us in connecting this day, which is part of history, with our faith and our values. And so that's what I'm going to do in the form of a presidential platform. Now, although I know quite a bit about history and values, I don't have very much foreign policy or security experience. So I am pleased to be joined this morning by Kelsey Atherton. You might recognize Kelsey from previous presidential campaigns in this church. Our senior minister emerita, the Reverend Christine Robinson, ran for president for 20 minutes back in 2008, and she recruited a much younger Kelsey to speak then. He was 19 and just back from his first year of college. Christine knew that the 2008 election would especially impact our nation's youth. Kelsey had grown up in this church, and she wanted us to hear what he had to say. Well, I don't want to sound like we're taking the credit, but he did go on to major in political science and history. And after college, he moved to Washington, D.C. and became a journalist specializing in foreign policy and defense. Then, when Christine ran for president again in 2016, he returned as a campaign advisor. Today, Kelsey is back again as my presidential campaign advisor, and it's good to have you and your extensive UU presidential campaign experience with us this morning, Kelsey.
Pleasure to be here.
My fellow Americans and treasured friends from other lands, when the election takes place this fall, there are two things we can definitely count on. First, we will still very much be in the midst of this pandemic. When the votes are counted, we will still be in this pandemic. When the inauguration takes place, we will still be in this pandemic. The truth is, we're going to be in this thing until herd immunity is somehow achieved. And at that point, we're going to be coping with all that we have lost, and we're going to be making decisions about what we will want to have gained. We will have lost so much, but we will also have gained some things, like perspective, including perspective about how quickly large-scale change can occur. How will we proceed from there? I've heard people wish aloud that things would return to normal. And I understand, but should we return to normal? This question brings me to a second thing we know will be true when this election takes place this fall. A second thing that we know will be true is that we will still be facing the same moral and humanitarian crises that preceded the pandemic, and which the pandemic has made even plainer for all to see, especially racism. Racism, in truth, is the deadly epidemic that precedes COVID-19. Last week was Juneteenth. That's June 19th. the day news of emancipation finally reached Galveston, Texas in 1865. It was 2.5 years after Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation ending most slavery in the United States. It was 2 months after the end of the Civil War, during which those who fought to maintain slavery lost. And the news finally reached Galveston. It's hard to believe that the slaveholders really did not know the war had been lost, but on Juneteenth, everyone heard it and were freed at last from being the legal property of others. After that, Reconstruction began. In Reconstruction, Black people and white people were elected and they worked together in state legislatures. They rewrote constitutions. Laws were written guaranteeing free public education, letting elections be decided by popular vote, and raising taxes to compensate former slaves. Reparations. After all, for 250 years, whites had profited off of slavery, and not only off of the unpaid labor, but off of what you might call the slavery industrial complex. As Ta-Nehisi Coates points out, insurance companies made money off of policies that slaveholders purchased to protect their investments in slaves. Auction houses profited. Banks made interest off of loans used to purchase slaves. Slave sales were taxed. There were auctioneers and notaries. Wealth had been generated and brutally stolen. So legislatures considered reparations. Some legislatures in the South were majority Black or majority Black and white coalition. But former white slave owners resented this shift in power, and in 1872, the KKK was formed. A so-called redemption movement began, as they called it. It was actually deconstruction. It took apart what people had begun to build. Voting rights were blocked with a poll tax, a literacy test, and grandfather clauses, which grandfathered people not in but out by denying the vote to anybody whose grandfather had not been eligible. The white proponents of these laws said that they weren't racist because they didn't specifically say Black people couldn't vote. They argued that any Black person who met the criteria would be eligible to vote. So it was a law that didn't mention race, but clearly had an impact on a particular race. And that, my friends, that, my fellow Americans, is how racism is made structural and systemic. Structural systemic racism happens when laws and the way things are done clearly, disproportionately disadvantage Black people, Indigenous people, and other people of color without ever having to actually mention race. Today, voting is limited by the days and the hours polling places are open, the distance people have to travel, and by voter ID laws, and these also disproportionately impact people of color. In one Supreme Court case, the Supreme Court said they did so with surgical precision. With all of that deconstruction, the Jim Crow era began. A few generations later, a second Reconstruction occurred. This was the Civil Rights era. Social Security was expanded to include people of color who had been shut out through, you guessed it, structural systemic racism. Voting rights were resecured, schools were integrated. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. led the Poor People's Campaign to end poverty, and there were diverse coalitions of people pushing these things forward together. Some of the gains from that time lasted, but there was also another kind of deconstruction too. This time, the deconstruction that followed used code phrases like entitlement reform, states' rights, big government, and law and order. It focused on cracking down on crime through laws that actually had the effect of punishing people of color more harshly and more often than whites. Again, the very definition of structural systemic racism. And after a criminal conviction, when a person got out of jail, many times they no longer had the right to vote, to go to school, or to find a job due to their criminal record. The effect was, and it still is, a lot like Jim Crow. In fact, the lawyer and scholar Michelle Alexander wrote a book about it called The New Jim Crow, and you might remember me preaching about that a few years ago. Deconstruction, structural systemic racism, that is how we came to today, where there's a growing moral uprising against the way Black lives are harmed or ended by state violence and by poverty and health disparities and more. And it's why it's necessary and appropriate to say Black Lives Matter. Sometimes people want to turn that into all lives matter, but that takes the focus away from the fact that Black lives are specifically being treated as if they don't. It's like if you were at a dinner party where everybody had a plate of food except for Bob. Sorry, Bob. Imagine that Bob said, "I deserve food." And the table said, "Sure, Bob, everybody deserves food." But Bob never did get any. It would be obvious that people were not truly recognizing the problem, right? When Bob is the one without food, it's important to be specific that although we said everyone, Bob still does not have food, and Bob deserves food. And the longer everybody else eats right in front of him without fixing this issue, the more the whole dinner party starts to look like a creepy scene from a movie by Jordan Peele. Black Lives Matter. Saying it and responding to it is a theological imperative for UUs, for us who have as our first principle the inherent worth and dignity of every person. It's also our theological imperative to protect Indigenous lives and trans lives and immigrant lives and the lives of people with disabilities and the lives of people who are poor. We UUs, whose fifth principle is support for the democratic process, have a theological and a moral imperative to help remove all the barriers to full participation in our country, a country which promises the right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. And if we believe, as we profess in our sixth principle, in the goal of peace, liberty, and justice for all, then what is called for now is nothing less than a third Reconstruction. And so, my friends, I am running for president on a Reconstruction platform. In this platform, I am closely aligned with today's Poor People's Campaign. Today's Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, was all over the news last weekend for their virtual moral mass march on Washington. And I hope many of you joined me in participating that day. They call their platform a moral justice jubilee policy platform, and they have spelled theirs out in lots of detail. You can find it on the Poor People's website, Poor People's Campaign website. But here's what I want to lift up as I encourage you to vote for me, not really, but here's what I would do if I were president. I would work to end structural systemic racism and to restore the right to democracy and equal protection under the law, and all policies which have a disproportionate negative impact on people of color, including voter suppression, and expand voting rights, especially restoring them to those who have served their time. I'd lead our country in ending police violence and mass incarceration. No longer would the US lock up more people than any other country. No more criminalization of addiction, no more children dumped into foster care when their mother is jailed for a nonviolent crime stemming from poverty or addiction. No more jailing people simply because they're too poor to pay their court fees. This is happening in our country. And it's time to reimagine the police. What we have now is not working, and reform and retraining and additional funding have all failed already. Along those lines, I'd also take immigration and customs enforcement out of the Department of Homeland Security. The Department of Homeland Security's stated mission is to secure the nation from the many threats we face. Immigration is not a threat, it's a process. You know what is a threat? Hate groups. I'd set my sights on those. We should protect, not target immigrants. That's a fundamental teaching of the world's religious traditions. Welcome the stranger, provide hospitality, God's messengers arrive as strangers, but again and again, love has to beg to be let in. When will we learn? Next, I would create a national truth commission to study and to speak the truth about the impact of racism in America. And I would want that to include racism against the native peoples of this land. And I would also do something that is not specifically named in the Poor People's Campaign as far as I can tell, and that is also to establish a commission to study the idea of reparations. Every year for almost 3 decades, Congressman John Conyers Jr. introduced a bill to do just that, to study the idea of reparations. Not even pay them, but just spend some time with the question, actually. And regardless of which party was in control, that bill never went anywhere in Congress. Like many of our legislators who profess that Americans today are not responsible for the harm done to Black people in the past, Conyers lived through Jim Crow and lynching and redlining and land theft from Black homeowners, Black Americans not being able to get mortgages or business loans, mass incarceration, and more, all in his lifetime. He died last year at the age of 90. Now, Sheila Jackson Lee carries that bill forward, and it's time to act on it. I would invest in and improve public education and further desegregation of schools. I'd tend to the public safety net. People have a right to a basic, adequate standard of living. When the pandemic hit, there was this sudden bipartisan recognition that the unemployment system was not adequate. I'd maintain the expanded version. We also witnessed the illogical outcome of tying health insurance to employment. When a pandemic shuts down jobs, people lose their health insurance during a pandemic. No. Time for everybody to have access to health care, no matter what, all the time. People also need a living wage, and they need things like running water and electricity. Did you know that nearly 1 in 3 Navajo families does not have running water in their home? The pandemic has had a devastating impact on the Navajo Nation. And as Kelsey put it the other day, when washing your hands is a first line of defense, not having running water due to structural systemic racism is a deadly form of racism. By redirecting funding away from militarized policing and mass incarceration, and raising taxes on the wealthiest corporations and people, and by investing in the programs I've described, we create a country that is better for everyone. We need these things, and we need a healthy environment in which to live. Our next president needs to recognize climate change as the national emergency that it is and act swiftly. I'll do that. Finally, for too long, taxpayers have been funding and for-profit private companies have been profiteering from America's military aggression in foreign lands. Not only that, our involvement abroad is directly connected to state violence at home. It just does not have to be like this. So here, I'm going to turn the pulpit over to my advisor for a few minutes. Kelsey?
What does it mean to be safe in the world? From the moment we step outside our front doors, if we are fortunate enough to have shelter, we are in this world. And every day we place our trust in thousands of strangers that we can go about our lives and make it home safely. I am here to talk about foreign policy, but I would be remiss if I did not start by saying how arbitrary and human-created these divisions are. As our neighbors to the south in Las Cruces and El Paso Juarez can attest, the truth is we are deeply connected through and around the force that draws borders between lives. And we are in the midst, domestically, of an uprising against police violence, one sparked by the police killing of George Floyd. The history of policing is one of colonial violence, and the tools of militarized policing have their origins in the interplay between war abroad and violent repression at home. The precursors to police were armed slave patrols in the South and armed anti-native night watches throughout the colonies. The moment those patrols set foot outside the stockades and walls of European settlements, they transformed from enforcers of the law into a paramilitary, armed for war against people seen as foreign enemies. Today, when the military gives police heavy armored cars, it sends the same message as when those vehicles are used overseas. To be among people is to expect violence. Rubber bullets and tear gas, both nominally less lethal weapons, have their origins in wars of colonial occupation, in the violence between domestic and foreign policy. When we see calls to defund and then abolish police and prisons, those calls are rooted in a bold premise that we as a community can build alternatives to violence, and we can build them together. We are called as Unitarian Universalists to honor the inherent worth and dignity of every person, to seek justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, and to build a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Together, these principles read as a call to solidarity, of working with strangers to take care of people we do not know. We've all done a bit of that during the pandemic, from staying home to halt the spread of COVID, to wearing masks every time we go out in public, making sure that our very presence does not inadvertently cause someone harm. Solidarity requires us to start from the premise that we are not enemies, that we are instead one international community within and beyond our borders. Community is work, and cohabitating our shared blue boat home means that people and nations have to hold each other in covenant. It is easy for world leaders to distract from their own failure to prevent tragedy by telling an us versus them story. But there is only us on this planet, and while we may not like every or even any government in power, we have to start from acknowledging first that we are in community together and building from there. The United States, at home and abroad, is built to fight enemies, but it does not have to remain that way. The Poor People's Campaign calls for a sweeping change to the violence-first culture of permanent war that defines US foreign policy. The campaign calls for defunding the Pentagon's budget by $350 billion, enough to bring about meaningful changes in what the military buys, in how it is deployed across the globe, and in how easy it is for presidents to start new wars. Reallocated, that money could instead take care of the basic needs of millions within the US, and it could fund diplomacy, foreign debt relief, and humanitarian assistance abroad. The Poor People's Campaign also reminds us that deprivation, too, is a kind of violence. It calls for an end to sanctions on nations, including Iran and Venezuela. Sanctions are designed to deprive people so much that they revolt against their own governments. Sanctions have never succeeded in that aim, but they do consistently hurt poor people. If we are to build that beloved international community, we have to start from trust and good faith instead of violence and coercion. This means, in part, rejoining treaties recently abandoned. It means agreeing to work together on everything from halting and reversing climate change to specific nuclear stockpile reductions to building a shared infrastructure of global health. Being part of a community means promising this work to each other and then promising it again, even when we fall short. And if we are to build a global community that can rise to the challenges of the pandemic and to climate change and to whatever else the future throws at us, we cannot do so from a permanent state of war. Thank you.
Can you imagine it? A country where everybody can live with dignity, in safety, with health, and with education. It would be a big change. But a gift of the pandemic is that we now know how quickly big change can occur. Change is possible. Okay, my campaign is now ended. And I mean it. We UUs do not mess around with our votes. So don't vote for me. Vote for somebody who's still in the race. Vote for the leader who you think will best represent your UU values and will lead our country forward toward reconstruction and toward healing. But then here's the thing. We can't let up. We're not gonna let up, because this is not about a particular political party or one particular leader. And this kind of change is not going to happen without a sustained movement behind it. This is a movement, not a moment. So we will continue relentlessly, fearlessly to imagine, visualize, and co-create the path forward together. May it be so.
As we prepare now to take up the offering, I want to remind you that our change for the future recipient for this quarter is still Oxford House, an organization that provides residential support to women in recovery. You can make an online offering by clicking on the link that we'll put in the chat box. And if you prefer, simply mail a check to the church. We will now take up the offering for the work of this church and the work of this church in the community.
is generously given is received with gratitude. Thank you on behalf of First Unitarian and on behalf of Oxford House. We are nearing the end of this formal service. If you'd like to join the small group chats after the service, simply stay on during the postlude and you'll be zoomed to a breakout room at the end of the song. You're welcome to continue sharing messages in the chat box while you wait, either privately or to the whole group. As we extinguish our chalices, I offer a few more words from Reverend Lynn Unger's poem, Pandemic. Promise the world your love, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, so long as we all shall live. Be well. Go in peace, my friends.